There will be, in the next generation or so, a pharmacological method of making people love their servitude and producing dictatorship without tears, so to speak, producing a kind of painless concentration camp for entire societies, so that people will, in fact, have their liberties taken away from them, but will rather enjoy it because they will be distracted from any desire to rebel by propaganda or brainwashing enhanced by pharmacological methods. And this seems to be the final revolution. Aldous Huxley. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Secrets of Saturn Radio. My name is Jason Lindgren. This is the first episode. I have with me tonight a gentleman by the name of Russell Blattberg, who has a very interesting and rather scary story to tell. Good evening, Russell.
Hi, Jason. How are you doing, man?
I'm wonderful. How are you, sir?
Oh, God. You know, I've been better, man, I could say.
Well, we did have a little chat before we started this interview, and just to give a quick idea of who you are somebody who ran a page for Jordan Maxwell, and that's how I found you, and we became friends a few months ago while I was doing research and reaching out into the wide world, just trying to find other people, like-minded individuals to chat with, and we had a several-hour conversation that night, and we've been keeping in touch since then. You're an esoteric scholar, I guess we could say. I believe you said you run 6 Facebook pages. And
Yep, that's correct.
You have a lot of knowledge. You've been studying things for quite a few years, and you just went through a very negative experience, to say the least. So why don't we just let you tell your story?
Well, thank you very much, Jason. I'll just give people a little bit of background into my life so they can get a sense of who I am and how I got to this point, because, you know, we all have a story to tell, right? Well,
indeed.
Pretty much, I grew up in a very wealthy Jewish family. My mother's father killed himself, and she inherited millions and millions and millions of dollars. And the way that my family got its wealth is, it's interesting because, first of all, I'm related to quite a few famous people. I'm related to Jonas Salk, the man who created the polio vaccine, which we know is part of the essentially the Nazi eugenics program, you know, under the guise of, we're helping people, right? I'm also related to J.D. Salinger. A big part of the way my family got its money was during the Great Depression. And again, I'm not even exactly sure of my entire family's history because a lot of it has been kept from me, and I don't even know everybody's names and such. So you're going to have to just take this at face value. But one of my relatives during the Great Depression ran something called like a penny a day insurance and made a real fortune. And then this money was reinvested in stocks and bonds. One of my family members sold the land to Walt Disney for, I think it's Disneyland in Florida. And then ultimately, my mother's father was a stockbroker, and he, like I said, he made a lot of money in stocks and bonds. And he had MS and ultimately killed himself. He was a very unhappy person, as most rich people tend to be, ironically.
I've heard that.
Well, you know, money isn't everything, and money doesn't buy happiness. That's for damn sure. And people who are usually obsessed with always making more money, they rarely enjoy their life, and they have very little love, and that's why they're so greedy.
They're so focused on the acquisition of wealth that they don't actually see what that wealth could be used for.
Of course, you know, they're just trying to enhance their lot in life and enhance their power and the prestige of their families, and they don't give a fuck about people, man. That's the reality of the situation. And now, ultimately, my uncle has essentially created a hedge fund, which is, ironically, it's called Poetic Justice, and he manages probably about $300 million or so, which is no small sum. My mother is a multimillionaire, and she has most of her money invested in this fund. She probably has about, I don't know, $40 or $50 million. It's quite hard to say. But basically, I grew up and I lived a privileged life, but you know, it's not all paradise because my father had a very, very difficult life. As a child, he was continually raped by his father and molested, and he would be taken down to the basement for quote unquote haircuts. And my grandmother would just turn up the volume on Jeopardy or Wheel of Misfortune or whatever game show she was watching. And when he grew up, he went to medical school in France to avoid the Vietnam War draft. And when he came back, ultimately, my mother went to school at Harvard, and she graduated. And one of her friends, I guess, knew my father and connected them. And my mother was a very delusional person, and in a lot of ways I guess my father was running from his past, and he was very confused about his sexuality. My grandmother told me a story about how Paul, that was my father's name, took her and my mother out to a gay bar, and basically my grandmother told my mom not to marry him because she thought he was gay, which he ultimately was, or at least he was very very confused, to say the least. But my mother, she was basically, just like a lot of people, I guess. She was very insecure, and she wasn't confident in her looks, and she was just desperate to be with anyone who would love her, and she wanted kids, and he wanted kids, and so that's how they kind of rushed into getting married, and it was all based on a lie to begin with. And ultimately, as anything that's based on a lie will ultimately crumble, and that's really what happened. My father was a doctor, and my mother is a psychologist. So you can kind of see where the family background leads and ultimately will go. My father was horribly addicted to prescription pills and essentially used them to kill himself. At a certain point, my father was cheating on my mother with a man, and she broke up with him, and they separated, and a month later he killed himself. And now I just wanted to give that background because it all ties into what I'm talking about and how I got to where I am. And why I am who I am, I suppose.
And we must understand the past to understand the present and future.
Well, that's right. And he who controls the past controls the present. It's very true. And history is just his story, and we know history is written by the victors. And so
yes,
it is important to remember what has happened and accurately retell it, because it can be twisted and manipulated to create a bad, very dystopic future, and that is what's happening. But anyway, basically after that point, my mother basically had a mental breakdown, and I was totally traumatized, and it kind of woke me up at a very early age to the fact that all is not well in the world. We live in a very sick world, and basically my mother at that point, I look a lot like my father. I have similar tendencies to my father, and she really projected her trauma and her fears onto me. And she basically, since my father killed himself, she basically has been treating me as if I am my father and I'm going to go down the exact same path. And so her biggest fears were that, she couldn't control me because she couldn't control my father. And so she has spent her whole life and her whole energy really in trying to control me. She basically forced me into therapy. She has always tried to find something wrong with me. She's convinced that I have ADHD and learning disabilities. She forced me to take Adderall, and I rejected it. I didn't want to do it. And this was at age 12 and 13. And, she made me do it for a week, and she literally wouldn't take no for an answer. And then, when I wouldn't take that anymore, it was literally driving me crazy. It made me go into fits of rage, and then I wanted to cry. It was horrible. It's like giving kids speed, because what? I mean, I was getting good grades in school. I was getting A's and B's, so why do I need to take the drugs? And then she forced me to take Ritalin, and I did that for another week. And then after that, I wisened up, and I was just like, no more. You can't force me to take this. But like I said, she forced me into therapy with probably about 7 or so different therapists. And when I was 14, I started smoking pot and I started playing poker. And these were two things which she had a real problem with. I was very successful at poker from almost right from the onset. And during high school, I made over $100,000 playing online. My mother tried to always prevent me from playing, and I bought a laptop secretly with my earnings, and I was playing off the neighbor's Wi-Fi on school nights, And basically, I definitely had an affinity for cannabis from a very early age, and like I said, I started smoking at 14 and have never stopped. And the more that I've learned about it, the more that I realize that this is one of the answers to a lot of the problems on our planet. Paired with its male counterpart, the hemp plant.
Right.
But basically, to make a long story short, when I was 18, my mother had always been pushing me to go to college, as any good Jewish mother would, I suppose. Right? Anxiety-ridden, upward climbing. You got to go to school and do this. Just be a part of society and find your place in it. But I never have fit into society, and I never really have been interested in being part of it because society is just a sickness. And literally, I did a semester at Bentley College, and I was studying finance and entrepreneurship, but it was a waste of my time, and it was a huge waste of money. I mean, the school costs almost $60,000 a year. Granted, my mother was paying for it, but if I had, but still, yeah. I mean, imagine, and a lot of people take out loans, or
most people
do whatever to go to these schools, and it's just the biggest waste of time, money, and energy. And all they want to do is control you and make you just jump through hoops so you can get your Masonic degree so you can go and work for some Fortune 500 company if you're lucky, right? But anyway, and they were just teaching me all this bullshit where I had, I'd been playing poker from an early age. I've been managing my own money. I started my own poker training website. I've been doing poker coaching. I had started doing investing from like age 16. And, it was just a big waste of time. It was all hypothetical stuff. Oh, if you had $1 million to do a business, and just all this bullshit, right? No real world practicality whatsoever. And in college, I was selling weed, and I got in trouble for that. My roommate basically ratted me out, and over that college break. Well, first of all, I got in trouble for that, and that was an issue, and I basically broke my collarbone snowboarding, and I ultimately decided that I was going to take a semester off. But really, it was my intention never to go back. That was just only to keep my mother, give her the hope that maybe I would stay in school, right?
But it was your big out.
Right, exactly. But and the thing is that at this point I had about $50,000 as a bankroll that I managed to hold on to from poker, and so I was able to start a life for myself. And for several years, that it just was fine. I played poker professionally. I did very well. I lived, in California and Vegas and Colorado and Massachusetts and Illinois. And ultimately, I cashed in the 2010 main event. I made $40-some-odd thousand. I was staked for that, so I didn't keep all of it. And in 2011, I won a World Poker Tour event for $112,000, which I was staked for that as well, and so I didn't keep all of that either. But
would it be safe to say that anyone into that, into the poker thing, into that society, you actually are fairly well known?
Yeah, I mean, basically, I played, up to $200, $400 blinds online. I mean, that's a maximum of a $40,000 buy-in game. Which is the highest stakes online. I've won, I've won tournaments for $80,000. I've had days where I've won $80,000, days where I've lost $60,000. So yeah, most people within that community would know me. If you Google Russell Blattberg, you'll find pictures of me, from poker, and you could find poker training videos that I've done, all kinds of stuff. But anyway, that's not really what I want to talk about.
Of course,
that's just kind of how a little bit of background. And so basically, the way that I really started waking up to what was going on in the world was through the financial markets. As you know, in 2007 and 2008, essentially there was the housing crisis and the mortgage
the bubbles popped.
It popped, and of course, what people have to realize that it was all created by design. I read a book called The Big Short, where essentially they talk about how all of these banking reforms were taken apart so that essentially, the derivatives market was allowed to swell to well over $1 trillion, which it's just important to understand there isn't $1 trillion in the entire world, because what a derivative is a bet on a bet on a, I'm sorry, trillion. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean $1 trillion. I mean a quadrillion. I'm sorry. Excuse me. That's what I meant. A
Much
quadrillion. Right. Yeah. I mean, because the thing is, we know. You have to excuse me there. In the financial bailouts, there have been trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that have been given to these banks. For what exactly? And that's an important question. And
yeah, very much so, actually, because it has a lot to do with what's going on now.
It really is. And there's a great video which people can look up. It's called $9 trillion Missing from the Federal Reserve, where Alan Grayson is, who's a congressman, is grilling the Inspector General of the Federal Reserve on how could you possibly just be missing $9 trillion?
Yes, I've seen some of the clips of that, and then he is indeed grilling.
Oh, absolutely. And if anybody who watches that video, anybody who I've ever showed that video, they're kind of shocked because, how can they just not be able to account for $30,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country? and the thing is that actually, the sum of these financial bailouts have reached over $30 trillion, and they literally are printing. On the public record, they say it's $3 billion a day, but it's actually more like six. Because they just lie to us about everything, and
but they're not even printing it, are they? It's just digital creations in the system, correct?
That's exactly right.
Because if I remember correctly, last time I looked up a statistic, it was something like 5% or 3% only of the Federal Reserve currency on the planet is actually a physical currency. The rest is all just numbers in the system.
Well, you're right, but actually it's more like 1% now, because ultimately their goal is to digitalize all the money. And there have been news recently where in Britain they're now making it so you can't ride the bus and pay in cash anymore. And this is the trend. But anyway, going back to what I was saying, this is kind of how I started to realize what was going on in the world. And I always had an interest in this because my family was directly involved in it. And so it kind of started waking me up to what was going on in the world. A big eye-opening moment for me was basically in 2010. Like I said, I had been running this poker training website, and I met this man who was a Forex trader. And basically we agreed to swap Forex coaching for poker coaching because he wanted to get better at poker, and he was just a fish when it came to that. He was totally hopeless. But
what is Forex, by the way? I'm actually not familiar with that.
Currency trading.
Oh, okay.
And basically he said, all right, I'm happy to teach you some stuff, but first I want you to watch 2 videos. And he basically sent me these 2 documentaries. One was called Ring of Power, and the other is called The Arrivals. If you haven't watched them, I recommend that you do. They're really they're quite good. I still have people watch them to this day because that's how much they had an impact on me. And it really woke me up to what was going on in the world. And, it talks all about the ancient history of how we got here. It talks about the reptilians. It talks about, obviously, the shadow government. It talks about, how 9/11 is a total fraud and all this stuff. And I had suspected all this. And as I had done more and more research, I started shorting banking stocks. I bet against AIG.
How did you know to do that?
Well, because they're all fraudulent. But the thing is that basically the fact of the matter is that it doesn't matter anymore because these companies, they lie about their quarterly earnings. They'll literally these different banks, they talk about how they have literally 0 losing trading days in a quarter. That's impossible. As a poker player,
that's not possible.
As a poker player, you cannot have a winning session every session. It doesn't matter if you're the best player in the world. The best players in the world only win 55% of the time. I mean, that makes you the best player in the world. If you're winning 55% of your sessions, you're going to be a multimillionaire. So to claim that as a trader you're winning every day, one of two things is happening. You're either outright lying and just saying, oh, we made this much, when it's not really true, or, you are the one rigging the markets. I mean, it can only be one of two scenarios, and it's both, frankly. But so basically, this kind of really got me down this whole path, and the more that I woke up to what was going on in the world, the harder it was for me to live. Now, I had an experience when I was living in Boulder, Colorado, and this really just set me on my path to where I am today. Basically, I was driving home from a friend's house, and I had a gram of weed in my car. I didn't have a medical marijuana card at the time, which in hindsight, I would recommend anybody, if you're living in a state where there's the option to do so, I recommend you do, because it doesn't matter if you get your weed not from a dispensary or whatever. You just need to pay to be protected from the system itself, because they will brutalize you over a plant, And this leads into what we're really talking about, which is ultimately the freedom to decide what you do with your body and what you put in your body. Because if you can't decide how to live your life, then are you free? I don't think so. And so basically, and just, Boulder is a huge weed town. Everybody knows they just legalized pot in Colorado. And so this was just a couple years ago. And basically, I was pulled over about a couple blocks away from my house. And this female police officer says, do you know why I pulled you over? And I say, I literally have no idea, because I wasn't breaking any laws. And she said, I pulled you over for speeding. And she said I was going 45 and a 30. And actually later I realized that the speed limit there was 40. And I was only going 35. So, but it was the end of the month and she had to make her quota. And that's the world we live in. And so basically she said, I smell weed. I said, yeah, I got a gram of weed. Here it is. No big deal. Just give me a ticket. And she basically had me do a roadside test, which, just so you know, you have the right to deny, but they will automatically pull your license. But, if you are high or you have an issue, I would recommend you do deny that test, because they'll pull your license, but they won't be able to give you a DUI. And I wasn't even high at the time. And basically I was scared, but I thought I did okay, touching my nose and walking in a straight line, all this stuff. And basically she slapped the handcuffs on me and said, I'm arresting you for not a DUID, but suspicion of a DUID, which is driving under the influence of drugs. I spent that night in the drunk tank, and they kept saying, well, oh, you shouldn't have drank, drunkie. And, really, it was really quite terrible. And then, the next morning I got out, and of course they take your car and put it in an impound, and they expect you to just get over there to go get your car out, which is across town. So the system has no empathy. And I was able to get a ride over there, and basically the problem was I couldn't find the registration for my car. I just couldn't find it, and my title was out of date. And so they said, okay, go to this office or whatever. So I went there, and basically they said, all right, well, you have to request a new title from Illinois, because I had bought the car out of state. And I said, all right, well, how long is that going to take? And they said, 2 to 3 months. And I'm like, well, what do you mean 2 to 3 months? And they're like, yeah. So basically, I now no longer had a car for 2 to 3 months. And every day that it's an impound, I had to pay $20. And so I hired a lawyer and to see what I could do about this and to represent me, because I was, what are you supposed to do, right? And that costed another $2,500, and basically, long story short, at my court date, he basically comes back and says, well, look, man, the DA is corrupt, and even though your blood work came back and they couldn't prove that you were high, it doesn't necessarily matter. You still may not be able to get off. And I was going to have to spend several thousand more dollars to pay him to get off. Or, I was facing probation and, community service and paying, like $1,000 in fines. And, and I had to rent a car at one point. And so I'd spent like $10,000 trying to get this taken care of. And keep in mind, I didn't have my car for almost 3 months. And literally, here he is telling me, you're going to have to spend thousands of more dollars, and even that won't guarantee, that you'll get off. And so at this point, knowing what I did, I just got so frustrated with the whole system that I outright decided to just leave the country. I literally walked out of the courtroom without signing up for probation, without doing any of it. I didn't pay my fines, and a week later I left the country and I moved to the Philippines. And basically, the Philippines is a really messed up country as well, because Philippines is basically an American colony, and it's been colonized several different times. And now, America is the current rulers of this country. And basically the language which is spoken in the Philippines now is primarily English. And the only subject in schools which isn't taught in English there is Tagalog, which is their native language. Now, another thing which I thought was interesting was that basically when America set up all these military bases in the Philippines, what they did is they repaved all the roads to make them from 6 inches of concrete to 2 feet of concrete. And the reason that they did that was so that they could roll tanks out through the entire country. Because ultimately, the Philippines is going to be a central point for America to engage in World War III with China or all these Asian countries. And basically, Manila is the most populated city in the world, and it is very much dominated by the Catholic Church. And the thing is that the Philippines is world known for its amazing fruits. It has some of the best mangoes and coconuts in the world. But the people there, they are literally, all they do is they eat meat, they drink beer, and they want to eat lots and lots and lots of Nestle chocolate and sweets.
Really?
McDonald's is very popular there. And it's interesting how in different countries they adjust the menu. For example, one of the things I thought was funny is that McDonald's in the Philippines, they serve something called like a sweet pasta with like sweet tomato sauce, which, you wouldn't even think of. But, they...
Definitely not in McDonald's.
Right. Well, it's interesting. And actually, in the Philippines, what they want, essentially what they've got is everyone wants to be an American. A lot of Filipinos, the way that they support their families is by going and working in other countries because they can't earn a living wage to support their families. And so they go to America and all these different other first world countries. And, they end up living there for years and years and years and just sending money back for their families. And the thing is that everyone in the Philippines wants to be white. They all these companies like Dove and these other companies, they sell like shampoo and all these different products with skin bleaching or skin whitening in it. So because people want to be whiter, because that's how much they have lost their whole culture. And like I said, Manila is one of the most populated cities in the world, and part of the reason for that is the dominance of the Catholic Church. And when I was there, they were trying to pass a bill called the RH bill, which was essentially, going to allow for abortion in the Philippines, which is currently illegal. And the thing is that the Catholic Church, it's so sad, man, because literally people believe that it's evil to have an abortion or to use even birth control or condoms or any kind of anything. And people have, they'll have 8 different kids or whatever, and they literally, are forced to eat garbage or become beggars on the streets. And there are all kinds of syndicates where they have 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds. Literally, when you're taking taxis, you'll have these little girls come up to you and they're trying to sell, flowers and tapping on the window of your taxi. It's very sad, And
what is it that you did while you were there?
Well, I was just playing poker, and ultimately I wanted to start a farm and get away from everything. But the thing is, there is no way anymore, because what you realize is you can go all the way across the world and everything is Americanized now, because that's what the New World Order is all about. It's all about these major corporations
taking over everything?
Taking over every country. And what we do is we will have a war, and then ultimately establish our military bases, and then we bring in our culture and we subvert the local culture and force them to industrialize. And that is what's happening all over the world. And ultimately, when I was there, it was after Fukushima, and just from the pollution in Manila and from what I'm sure must have been the radiation, I got really sick. And I also got really sick of playing poker. I'd been doing it for 10 years, and I just got really tired of it. And now, alternately, I had gone further and further into my research, and one of the things I wanted to mention is that while I was living in Boulder, Colorado, I saw my first what most people call UFOs. And it was funny. I had gone and seen Bob Saget, and then that night I went and I saw my first UFO. And then after that, it kind of never stopped in a way. And I had an experience in the Philippines where basically, ultimately during my time in the Philippines, I went on a horrible run in poker. I had gone on basically a $250,000 downswing, and I had lost a lot of money in the financial markets as well. And I had gotten very sick, and I was running out of options. And basically, I had an experience one night where I saw literally about 100 ships, and one ship came flying over, the condo building where I lived, and it started flashing all these multicolored lights. And literally, from this point on, I started having telepathic communication with these entities who are Pleiadians. And basically, one night I took acid, and I was listening to the audio version of Barbara Marciniak's book, Bringers of the Dawn. And then, I turned it, I paused it because I was just tripping so hard. And then literally, these beings started communicating with me telepathically. And one of the most important things that they said to me is that you are what you create, and you create what you are. And that really has stuck with me because I think it's very powerful.
That really just sounds like the power of intention.
It is, man. And the thing is that ultimately, I really love Aaron Russo's quote where he talks about, in his last interview with Alex Jones, it's called Reflections and Warnings.
Yes.
Where Alex asks him what his philosophy on life is, or what he thinks the importance of life is. And he basically said, I think that the importance of life is to like yourself. And in order to like yourself, you have to respect yourself. And in order to respect yourself, you have to take actions that others would respect, or that you would respect if others were to take them. Because, at the end of the day, you can have all the money in the world, but if you look in the mirror and you don't like what you see, then what's the point of living?
Exactly.
And he basically said, unless you stand up for what's right in life, then you're nothing. And to me, that was very powerful. And, he lived that because ultimately Nicholas Rockefeller befriended him and tried to bring him into the Council on Foreign Relations. And, he told him that the ultimate game plan of the elite and the banking industry was to basically get everyone implanted with an RFID chip. Mm-hmm. And, where if they don't like what you're doing, they'll just turn off your chip and all the money will be in those chips and everything will be tracked that way. And everything is moving in that direction anyway. And now something my girlfriend told me is that literally they did an independent study of 3,000 different people, and literally 1,000 of those people already have RFID chips in them. And the way that they're able to do this is through the vaccines and also through dental fillings. It's really unbelievable. So people talk about this being a conspiracy, but this is a reality.
Now, I've seen articles popping up quite a bit about that, but I haven't seen anything documented yet, documented evidence. Are there people who have actually literally found the chips in them?
Oh, yes. I have a friend who, well, we're not really friends anymore, and he pretty much ultimately has gone really psychotic, and he is on a total path of self-destruction. But, he has this story that he had told everybody, and no one really believed him except me because, well, first of all, I had no reason not to believe him. And second of all, basically what he said is that, he was at a party at the University of Vermont, and these kids basically drugged him out on acid, like he drank a cup of water and it had all this acid in it. And he doesn't really, he's hazy on exactly what happened, but he said, he was brought to this house and it seemed like there were all these like mafia people there. And then somehow he ended up in a hospital because he brought him there or whatever. But basically, as a result of this, he ended up with 2 RFID chips in either shoulder. And literally you could actually squeeze his shoulders and you could literally feel and see the chips. And you could see where they had made the incisions in either arm. So, I know for a fact that they're doing this to people because I've seen it firsthand. Now,
What size were the chips?
These were quite large, actually. They were about maybe the size of a penny, but they were in they were kind of like maybe like the size of maybe most pills that people would take in, not round pills, but those
Like a multivitamin size?
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I was having trouble describing it, but anyway, um, so yeah, and the fact of the matter is that we are being mass medicated whether you like it or not. Fluoride is a perfect example of that. Most people think, well, fluoride is good for your teeth. And no. The thing is that fluoride first came out of Nazi Germany. It was produced by a chemical company named IG Farben, which was also producing Zyklon B and all this other stuff. The gas they were spraying in the in the shower rooms, to kill Jews and many other people. And basically, they started putting fluoride in the water in the concentration camps under the guise that it was good for the children's teeth. Like anything they did in the concentration camps was good for any of the people, right? For their own good, of course. Basically, the reason that they did it was to dumb people down, make them sick, and make them less able to resist domination. And of course, it's used for the same reasons today. It's in a huge amount of the water supply all over the world, and virtually almost everyone brushes with fluoridated toothpaste and has had fluoride treatments on their teeth from dentists. And everyone has received vaccinations, which not only are full of different pathogens and viruses, but are loaded with thimerosal, which is basically just mercury. And in the last couple of years, maybe this has been going on for a long time, but really the intensity of it has been stepped up. They've been spraying chemtrails, which are basically just full of different heavy metals, aluminum, barium, strontium, all kinds of different stuff, and actually nanotechnology. And what nanotechnology is, for anyone who doesn't know, is basically mini computers which are basically infinitesimally small. They're like dust particles, and a lot of it's referred to as smart dust. And basically, people have experienced something which has been dubbed as Morgellons disease, and the way that the government has classified it is basically that it's a psychosomatic disease. But what actually has happened is that people develop these huge rashes and sores, and actually they find that there are these thread-like fibers, literally, which are metallic, that are actually coming out of people's bodies.
I've seen the pictures of that. It's scary.
It is scary. And the fact of the matter is that if you look up and you see, people say, oh, well, that jets have always done that, or, oh, certain kind of jets do that. No. The thing is that if most normal planes, they have contrails, which, they only go about 25 to 50 feet out from behind the plane, and that's it. But the government has invested over $1 billion a year, in something called Project Cloverleaf, which is basically the spraying of chemtrails over the mass populace. And now this is happening in countries all over the world. And I would say that primarily Monsanto is behind this, because ultimately you have to always ask who benefits. And essentially what, the government and the corporations, because we are living in a fascist system where the government and the corporations are, I like what John Perkins, this man who wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman, he calls it the corporatocracy. And I think that's a very good way to put it.
Yes.
Ultimately, they are the ones who have genetically modified aluminum-resistant seeds, because what they're trying to do is not only make us sick and kill us, but they're making it so literally the soil becomes infertile, so that you can't grow organic food anymore, and you need to buy Monsanto seeds. And literally Monsanto now controls around 50% of the world's food supply. And I also was mentioning a statistic earlier that in Jim Marr's book, The $1 Trillion Conspiracy, where literally the American population represents 5% of the world's population, and they consume over 80% of the world's pharmaceutical drugs. So this country really is
a staggering
the apex
number.
It is staggering, and people don't want to look at it. And people could say, oh, well, it's just because America has more money. And it's like, well, no, a lot of it has to do with the advertising and television and literally the direct pharmaceutical involvement in our government. And this kind of ties into all of what I was saying. And so basically, in the last several years, I've basically, ultimately gone broke. And my mother has been trying to institutionalize me for the last 3 years, on the basis that I'm crazy because I believe in this stuff and because of my lifestyle and smoking pot. And so to fast forward to what part of the reason you wanted to interview me was basically, well, in the last 6 weeks, I've undergone some really crazy stuff. Now, I was dating this girl who actually was my brother's ex-girlfriend, and that caused a lot of family drama. And she had her own fair share of issues. And, basically she was DID and she'd been traumatized. And, but I stuck with her, which, for better or for worse, right? She was a sweet person, but she had a lot of issues. And ultimately, it turned out to be very bad for me. And the thing is that I wanted to move to Uruguay, and we did go down there and ultimately had to come back. And I inherited some money, and I basically told my family that I didn't want to be part of the family anymore because I really resent them for who they are and what they're doing. And basically, my family donates huge amounts of money to Obama and, any Democratic people that they support. And they also donate money to Zionist charities like the Anti-Defamation League and the State of Israel. And they're just, they're Zionists, which basically makes them Nazis. Hitler was a Rothschild, and ultimately World War II and Nazi Germany and the Holocaust really was there to ultimately create the State of Israel for the Rothschilds to ultimately foster World War III. And this goes back to Albert Pike. Are you familiar with Albert Pike?
Yes, 33rd degree Freemason.
Yep, and he was a Confederate Army general, and he was a Grand Wizard or Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan. And according to lore, he had some kind of a pendant which he could use to summon Lucifer. Take that for what it's worth. And maybe he was just interacting with reptilians or higher dimensional, negative beings. But basically, he's essentially channeled a plan for 3 world wars where ultimately the Illuminati would create these various groups and put against each other to ultimately dominate the world. And he wrote a letter to Giuseppe Mazzini where he outlines this. And I recommend that everybody listening to this go and look it up and read it because we are in the final stages of this plan. This is the end game, and we're very close to the end. And if this is successful, that's pretty much it for humanity. But anyway, I ultimately hooked up with Jordan Maxwell. Said that's how we ended up talking, and so this kind of gets us up to where we really want to be going with all this. And I had met him in 2013 when I was living in Colorado again. This is after I lived in the Philippines. And basically I listened to a radio show he did with Dolores Cannon, where at the end of it he gave out his phone number, and I tried giving him a call a couple times. And
now, before we go any further, why don't we, in case anyone's not familiar, say who Jordan Maxwell is?
Oh, of course. Jordan is literally the world's foremost authority on religions and secret astrotheology, and he really is the man who, in a lot of ways, got this whole thing started. He was mentored by Manly Palmer Hall, who is one of the highest-ranking Freemasons in the world, and he ultimately left Jordan with all of his works and all of his documents. And so Jordan really got a firsthand look into the darkness in the world, and he started he had done a tremendous amount of research, and he came out and if you don't know who Jordan is, just look him up on YouTube, or you can go to his website, jordanmaxwellshow.com. And one thing that's important for people to understand, if you want to support Jordan, his website, jordanmaxwell.com, was stolen from him. Yes. Which I believe, it's funny actually because Jordan doesn't see, or maybe he does, but how I believe that the people who advantage of Jordan were really just employed by the CIA, because too much has been done to discredit Jordan and to steal his work and defame his name. And it's so organized that you can tell that there is someone higher behind these people, which, they're called the Dolezals. It's this family. And they are idiots, but at the same time, someone is giving them information and directing them and giving them some power behind the scenes, because the whole thing has just gone too far, in my opinion. I could be wrong about that.
I've suspected something, but there's really, unfortunately, no evidence, but it just seems like circumstantial, like, what's going on here?
Right. And I've been, as I've worked with Jordan, I've seen how much has done to really destroy him. And, it just makes me see, because of who he is and how important his work is, that, there's a reason that people who are running the world, they know who Jordan is. And Jordan he brought David Icke to America, which is something that a lot of people don't know. He, ultimately, through his company TruthSeeker, he financed him for about $300,000. And so if you know who David Icke is, you can give Jordan some credit for that. And for
David Icke is now a world-renowned individual, speaker, lecturer, author.
Absolutely. And, I have a lot of respect for David, but I think it's unfortunate that he hasn't really given Jordan the help and the credit that I believe that Jordan deserves. And so ultimately, I decided that I would help Jordan out if it was literally the last thing that I did, and if it killed me, because the way that I saw it is that Jordan is like a Tesla level genius who has gone totally unappreciated. And as you know, Nikola Tesla in his last days, after J.P. Morgan destroyed him and Edison destroyed him, because of course he came out with a free energy device, which ultimately has been weaponized as the HARP technology, which is essentially weather modification machine, and ties in directly with the chemtrails, with the ionization of the atmosphere. And basically, Tesla was literally broke and homeless, and he couldn't even pay his hotel bills. And ultimately, they stole his laboratory, Wardenclyffe, from him, and he died totally destitute.
And Jordan's life seems to parallel that, doesn't it?
Absolutely, it does. When Jordan likes to say that, you try to help anybody in this world and they'll throw you in prison. And, a lot of, I know that's funny, and to a lot of people that may sound ridiculous.
Well, not funny, but.
Well, it's funny because it's true, but it's very sad.
Yes.
Because the reality of the situation is that is the case. And, I can say firsthand that it is true, because, the last couple of years, as I have woken up more and more and more, I have literally committed and dedicated my life to not only helping people, but broadcasting and posting the truth as I've seen it, to the best of my ability, as widely and as farly as I could. And I have paid the price for it, and so has Jordan. And that's why I empathized with him and I wanted to help him. And I basically, I gave him as much money as I could to help him with his legal defense, and ultimately, he helped him get out of the situation that he's been in. And, Jordan is not in an ideal situation now by any means, but let's just say that Jordan is safe now, or as safe as he can be, being who he is. But anyway, that's not really necessarily where we need to go with this. Although I did, one of the things that happened was that the way that I was able to get in touch with Jordan, because as people probably know, he's not an easy man to get in touch with. Now, if you want to support Jordan, you can support him through his website, jordanmaxwellshow.com, and you can donate directly via PayPal. Now, if you want to speak with Jordan directly, what I recommend is that you email him. His email is jordanmaxwellfiles@gmail.com. He's pretty good. You got to remember, this guy is almost 75, and, he's not the best with technology, and he admits this. But if you email him and you are respectful and you want to help him, and especially if you want to give the guy some money, I'm sure he'll probably respond to you.
And let's make it clear that his quote-unquote website, jordanmaxwell.com, is under control of that family you mentioned.
The Dolezals, yes.
And is not anything that you may try to use that website for is not going to get to him, especially money.
Right. It's very sad, and they cut off Jordan's income stream, and people who have tried to support Jordan, are just giving money to these criminals, and it's very sad.
I just want to make sure that gets out there. If
No, no,
you are looking to
you're
get
absolutely right to reiterate that.
right, if you're looking to get in touch with Jordan, jordanmaxwell.com is not the way to do it. His only outreach into the world right now is jordanmaxwellshow.com.
Right. And so basically, and the other thing was, like I said, the way that I was able to get in touch with him again, because we had been in touch in 2013, and then we kind of were out of touch as I was doing some other stuff. Was that he had a Facebook page that some of his friends had helped create on his behalf. And ultimately, the Dolezals, basically every time Jordan does just about anything, they threaten to sue whoever is doing anything. They threaten to sue Facebook, and they ultimately got his last Facebook page taken down, which, I mean, how do you do something like that? I mean, Facebook had to be complicit in this, and we know who's behind Facebook as well. So, I mean, that's not really that surprising. So I created a Facebook page in honor of Jordan. It's called, if you search Jordan Maxwell on Facebook, it comes up. And there is another Facebook page which is run by close friends of Jordan, which maybe, he considers to be his official page, which is Jordan Maxwell Show. But either way, so those are our pages, and you can check those out if you're interested. But basically, I helped Jordan, and ultimately, the person who was putting him up was one of the biggest medical marijuana growers in California, and he had offered me employment. And like I said, I'm a huge supporter of cannabis, and I just want to give credit to somebody who gets a lot of flack and who has had a lot of problems himself, a man named Rick Simpson. Now, Rick Simpson is a Canadian man who essentially rediscovered the cure for cancer and virtually all other diseases in the form of cannabis oil, the essential oil which you can extract with an alcohol-based extract from the cannabis plant. It's very easy to do. His documentary is called Run from the Cure. That's not Run for the Cure, but Run from the Cure. And his website is phoenixtears.ca, and I recommend highly that everyone do some research into Rick Simpson. And if you're not familiar with cannabis and hemp, another person is Jack Herrera, who is now dead, and he wrote a book called The Emperor Wears No Clothes. And so I am a huge advocate for cannabis and hemp, and these plants do not get the credit they deserve on this planet. And yeah, at the end of the day, people are fundamentally afraid of plants, but government.
We know there's reasons why behind all this, though.
Right. Well, the government basically wants to steer you away from anything which is going to heal you and impart knowledge upon you and bring you into higher consciousness. And they, the only like Terence McKenna said, we live in a sugar, alcohol, tobacco, and red meat culture. I mean, these are the preferred government-sponsored drugs, and of course, the pharmaceutical industry. You have kids these days snorting Adderall and popping Vicodins and Oxycontin, which is basically synthetic heroin. And, we know that the CIA is the biggest drug runner in the world. If you look at the war in Afghanistan, and, it's all about this war on terrorism. It's not the war on terrorism. It's the war of terrorism. I mean, that's what it is. And I like what Michael Tsarian said, how terrorism, it's not terrorism, but it's terrorism, because we're destroying the planet. And, if you look at the Iran-Contra scandal, that's a perfect example of, or Vietnam. And I realize I'm kind of jumping back and forth here, but basically in Vietnam, Monsanto produced Agent Orange, and these are the people now growing the bulk of the world's food supply. But anyway, fun facts, right? Real nice history. People don't like to talk about this stuff, but it's all true. And so in Afghanistan right now, the thing is that the Taliban actually had shut down the bulk of the poppy production there. And when the U.S. government basically took over with the military, we now have American troops are guarding the poppy fields and have basically revved up the heroin production there by like 800%. And the thing is that just like in Vietnam, heroin is shipped back in the dead soldiers' bodies and is basically sold by the CIA. Now, I wanted to bring up the Iran-Contra scandal if people are not familiar with this, because this is very well documented. Now, Gary Webb was a journalist who was ultimately killed for writing the book Dark Alliance. And then Michael Rupert, who was an LAPD narcotics officer, ultimately followed up kind of where he left off, and Michael committed suicide recently because he'd been harassed so much, and he was so depressed about the state of the world from things with Fukushima and just all of it. It's very sad. But this is all true, and this all needs to come out. And basically, George Bush, he went from being vice president and to being, or he was vice president, right, at one point, or maybe not.
Yes.
Okay.
George H.W. Bush was vice president for Ronald Reagan.
Right. That's what I thought. And just to, again, I realize I'm jumping around, but one thing that a lot of people don't know is that George Prescott Bush, George H.W. Bush's father, ultimately bankrolled Hitler via Union Bank, and he was indicted under Trading with the Enemies Act. But
yes, he was.
But no one cares about that. And
some things just aren't important, Russ.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, like maybe how Aleister Crowley was the original lineage for the Bush family. But anyway, who cares about that, right? But so basically, during the Iran-Contra scandal, what this was all about was basically George H.W. Bush. He went from being vice president, and then he was head of the CIA, and ultimately he became president. And basically what happened was the CIA was sponsoring drug running from the cartels in Colombia, bringing cocaine into America, turning it into crack, and then distributing it via a man named Freeway Rick Ross, who was basically set up by the CIA to basically distribute crack cocaine to the in the ghetto, and basically get the whole black and minority community and whoever hooked on crack, and then they ultimately used this to sell guns in Iran and fund wars in Panama and Nicaragua. And, this is all documented, and no one cares. No one cares. You tell people about this, and, people say, oh, well, it depends what journalists you read. It's like, no, it doesn't depend what journalists you read. This is what happened. But no one seems to care. Like
Freeway Ricky Ross has told his story quite a few places.
Oh, absolutely. And
I've listened to quite a few of his interviews. It's
he's
interesting.
Out now. He's a very, very interesting man. And he realizes what he's done and how he was used, just so used. But anyway, it kind of brings us up to where we are today, in that basically in the last 6 weeks, so I was going to help Jordan out, and I did, and I was being offered a job. One of his friends, and I don't necessarily want to go into all the details because it's kind of sensitive, but let's just say this friend really, even though he did help Jordan, he has his own issues, and ultimately the whole thing just didn't work out, and he did some pretty unethical stuff, not involving me. I don't want to get into the details. It's not important. But basically, I was put in a very bad situation as a result, and well, the thing is that I had broken up with my girlfriend, and she knew my family history, and she basically called my mom and told her that I was going to commit suicide. And, of course, she knew what kind of a reaction this would get from my mom. So basically, I was just on Facebook hanging out or whatever, and then the cops showed up at the house, and they basically ultimately arrested me and took me in on a 5150, which is basically if you're suicidal, they can literally put you in an institution.
Danger to yourself or to others, potentially.
Right. And so I was taken on a 72-hour hold. After I got out, my mom called the cops on me again and said I was going to kill myself again. And she was, just keep in mind, she was calling the cops from Massachusetts. So people from anywhere in the world can just call the cops on you, and they'll show up at your house, and you're basically guilty until proven innocent. And unless you have money to defend yourself or whatever, you're screwed, man. Or especially if you have a gun or any illegal drugs, and they don't even need a warrant to come into your house because they have, in their eyes, they have probable cause. And so anyway, fortunately, that time I wasn't arrested. But the problem was that I was in a very bad situation. I had pretty much was running out of money, and ultimately this man who was letting me stay at his place, he kicked me out. And after promising me work for months, he just really screwed me over. And basically, sort of, it's funny how things work out. It just is. I really wasn't talking to any of my family because, like I said, when I inherited money, I told my mom that I didn't want to be part of the family anymore. And literally just, as a side note, when I went to give my stepfather a hug goodbye, and, after I told my mom that he was cheating on her and using her for money, he literally he shoved me, which just validated everything. But anyway, this is not really the point. So anyway, I like I said, I wasn't talking to any members of my family, but actually, I don't even know how it worked out this way because I wasn't friends with any of these people on Facebook. But it's weird because they kind of follow they kind of stalk me through my Facebook, and it's created a lot of issues for me. But basically, my aunt she had liked the Jordan Maxwell page, and she commented on one of the posts, and I was like, "Wow, are you waking up?" And it kind of surprised me, And I started talking with her, and I told her about what had happened, and she said that she had no idea about any of this, that nobody in my family had talked about this. They kept it very on the hush hush. And so ultimately what she recommended was that I try to kind of basically manipulate my mother back, or try to just come to some kind of an agreement or compromise, because like I said, my mother is a multimillionaire, and well, frankly, I'm not. And so her suggestion was, well, what if you went into 90 days of rehab for $250,000. And I kind of laughed because my mom had been trying to institutionalize me for the last 3 years. And I said, well, that actually might work. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but I'm just telling you what's happened. And so this kicked off a series of negotiations where, my mother wanted me to fly into Boston, and she was going to hire a professional mediator. But ultimately what happened was that my uncle took over the role as mediator for us. And he married into the family, so he was a little bit more objective. And, he's a nice guy, but, people are a bit naive, right? Even if they're well-intentioned. And so the thing is that ultimately I wanted to do my rehab in California, and my mother was kind of against that. I wanted to do the rehab at a holistic center. And she really, she added later as a caveat, after we had kind of worked something out, that, and by the way, you're going to have to take drugs. And I said, wait, off drugs. This is not this is not take any drugs, because she basically has been saying I've been bipolar, and she basically she believed that my father was bipolar, which maybe he was, and that if these mood stabilizing drugs like lithium or something else, that it would have saved his life. Although I think that's probably not the case, because he was horribly addicted to drugs and he was abusing them, and he ultimately used them to kill himself. But anyway, that's another point. And so basically, she gave me the option of only four different facilities. One of them was in California, and I said, okay, I'll do that one. And then it turned out that one had full occupancy, and they weren't going to have anything available for over a month. And so basically that left me with the option that she gave me really only two options. There was a facility in Massachusetts, and then there was a facility in New Hampshire and another one in Florida. But the one in New Hampshire and Florida, it was the same company anyway. But I basically started talking with these people at this facility, and they assured me that I wasn't going to be forced to take any drugs against my will. And I started to develop a rapport with them, and it seemed like that this could work out. And ultimately, the deal that was brokered was that my mother would pay me $20,000 to go through this treatment, and then she would essentially give me $2,500 a month for the next 10 years, or even longer if I needed it. And well, I mean, that seemed like a pretty good deal to me. And I just said, okay, well, we need to get this in writing just so, it's clear and it's enforceable. And, basically, she was insisting that this facility kind of be put in the middle of the contract. And they sort of said, look, if you guys want to have this kind of a deal, that's sort of between you. Don't put us in the middle of this contract. There has to be trust, and we're not going to be involved in a contract, And that's not to say that there couldn't have been one. They just didn't want to be in the middle of it. And so my mother kind of used this as a justification, because she realized that they weren't going to force me to take drugs, and that ultimately that they kind of were turning things around on her, that she was being unreasonable. And ultimately, like I said, I got kicked out of where I was living, and the person that I was staying with, who, again, I don't want to name names or anything. It's not really important, but let's just say that she is somebody within the truth movement, and she basically pretty much had a nervous breakdown herself. And she started freaking out at me, and she was all jealous, and, she was screaming at my new, I had a new girlfriend, and she was screaming at her and all this different stuff. And so I was in a really bad spot, and I was left without internet, and basically, so I was in a really desperate situation. And my uncle kind of was like, I called him and I explained the situation. He, explained it to my mom, and she took advantage of my desperation, and she basically turned everything around at the last minute and found a different clinic called the Menninger Clinic, facility, but that it was a psychiatric facility.
Russ, back up a minute there. You broke up for a moment there.
Okay. Well, I was just saying that my mother took advantage of my desperation and turned everything around at the last minute, and she ultimately found a different.
Oh, we just lost you. Russ, Russ, you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Okay. Yeah, you cut out for a moment there. You said she took advantage of your desperation and she found a different location?
Yes, she found a clinic called the Menninger Clinic in Houston, Texas, which it turns out was not a rehab facility but a psychiatric facility. But unfortunately, I was without internet, and I pretty much was running out of phone minutes and running out of money, and I didn't have a car, and I don't even have my driver's license was ultimately suspended because I didn't pay a speeding ticket, or maybe it could have been from the stuff in Colorado that I didn't take care of. It caught up with me. I'm not really entirely 100% sure. And she basically gave me this ultimatum where either you take this deal or there's no deal and there's no help. And so I kind of got pushed into it. And my uncle basically asked me to trust him and to do it without the contract because my mom didn't want to do it. And he's like, well, your mom is going to pay you and like blah, 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 all this stuff, right? And so basically I called this clinic and they said, well, we don't admit people over the weekends. So, I basically told my mom to book me a hotel for the next day. And I was going to have my girlfriend, again, not the ex-girlfriend, but a new girlfriend, pick me up. And I would have a chance to spend some time with her before I went in. And, it would give me a couple days to look into the facility. But basically, my uncle called me back and he was like, hey, man, are you at the hotel? And I'm like, what do you mean? I said I was going to go tomorrow. And he's like, no. Your mom like booked the hotel already. You need to get over there. And like your flight is leaving at 7 a.m. in the morning. And so basically I just got like really like rushed into the whole thing. But because I was desperate, I kind of didn't really have another choice. And so ultimately I flew into Houston, Texas, where I was picked up by a driver. And they took me to this clinic where I voluntarily checked myself in. And then it was kind of like the door slammed shut behind me. And when I was there, immediately the first thing they did is they started diagnosing me with all this crazy stuff. They said I was delusional, that I was psychotic, that I was bipolar. And I basically was concerned that I had stomach cancer, or I've been having stomach problems for a very long time. And, I think maybe at one point I did have cancer, but I had taken enough cannabis oil that potentially maybe I had healed it or whatever. It's not really important. But they were basically saying that I had all these psychosomatic complaints when it turned out that later they found out that I had an ulcer. Probably from all the stress of all the stuff that had been happening in my life. But anyway, and dealing with all the toxins in the world. And basically I had a doctor there. His name was Dr. Heron. And like I said, he was not only did he diagnose me with all this stuff, but he continually was pushing lithium on me and all these other mood stabilization drugs. And when I didn't want to take the drugs, I told my mom, like, look, this wasn't what I signed up for. I was going to a rehab facility, and you said I wasn't going to have to take any medication. I wouldn't be forced to take any medication. This wasn't the deal. And she basically responded, and she pretty much told me, well, we never finished the negotiations. We never had a deal. And, no place would accept a contract. And basically, this is the help I'm giving you. And I said, that's fucking bullshit, Mom. Like, all right. And so then basically at that point, I decided that I wanted to leave. It didn't matter whether I was going to get $20,000 because apparently I wasn't going to get that anyway. I didn't want to be forced into treatment that I didn't want and being forced to take drugs that I, could potentially really hurt me. I mean, these drugs have horrible side effects.
Yes, it is.
I like what David Icke says. He says those aren't the side effects; those are the effects, mate. But anyway, the thing is that what I was told is that basically the doctor there said, "Well, I'm really sorry, but we're not gonna let you leave." And I said, "Well, what do you mean? You said it's voluntary to leave at any time." He said, "Well, yeah, that's true, but if you leave, like we basically, they didn't think suicidal, and they didn't think that I was a danger to others, but basically what they were saying was that because I didn't want to eat genetically modified food, and because I believed that these drugs do more harm than good, that I was basically a vegetable and a retard and incapable of nourishing and taking care of myself. And so, for my own good, that I had to basically be under lock and key." And I said, "That's fucking bullshit. I walked in here voluntarily, and this was never the deal." But they said, "Well, just go through this 3-week process, and we're going to run all these, these tests on you. And, you got this ulcer, and you're going to work, we're going to work it out, But I didn't really have a choice. I was under duress. And so I reluctantly agreed to stay because I didn't have a choice, because I thought that basically they were going to take me in on another 5150 at a much worse facility. And, this was a $30,000 a month facility. It was very nice on paper. It had a nice but ultimately the biggest donators to this this company I mentioned, it's a German name and probably a Nazi family that ran this place. But the biggest donators there were Goldman Sachs and BBVA, which is another bank. And that tells you a lot about who's really running the show.
I definitely find that very interesting, to say the least.
I think it is interesting. I think a lot of people wouldn't really draw those parallels. And, like I mentioned to you earlier when we were talking, that, you said, well, what could they possibly get out of it? And it's like, well, they get people locked up and they're forced to consume, tap water and fluoride products and aspartame and GMO food and snacks. And ultimately, Coke products and ultimately, and Nestle, and before take a whole regiment of drugs, and being diagnosed with all these diseases. They're in the pocket of the banks and the pharmaceutical companies.
So basically, get you back into the program.
Absolutely right. And the thing is that basically, a big part of why I think you wanted to have me on this show is that basically, because what they were saying of my, quote, paranoid and delusional viewpoints about, conspiracies and government involvement in the pharmaceutical industry and pharmaceutical industry and the government and all of this stuff, that I'm, crazy and paranoid schizophrenic and they're going to just drug you out, and that basically I'm incapable of living my own life. And so ultimately, what happened was after a week and a half where, I refused to take any medication and I wasn't actively participating in their bullshit therapy groups. And I was resistant towards their psychological testing, which they were just going to use as a justification to, say I was bipolar and just jam drugs down my throat. They said, well, fine. If you aren't going to voluntarily be here, we're going to have you committed to a place where you can be involuntarily committed. And so ultimately what they did is they had two police officers come and pick me up and basically take me over to Methodist Hospital, where basically the first thing they told me is, yeah, you're bipolar. Without even talking to me, they're just, yeah, you're bipolar. And basically, if you don't get on mood stabilizing drugs, we can pretty much keep you here indefinitely. And ultimately, the court, if they so rule, can force you to take medication against your will, where if you won't take it voluntarily, they can inject it into you. And they can keep you up to 90 days at a time in one of these institutions. And literally every 90 days, there would be another hearing, and they can petition to have you in for another 90 days.
Now let's stop there for a moment. Just think about what you just said and what the implications are, not just to you, but to anyone. I mean, literally just, we suspect something's wrong. You're gone. You're in a facility. And you're going to do what we say. Yeah,
and if you don't, it's going to be 10 times worse. And so ultimately, I mean, talk about a good business model, take the drugs or take the drugs. I mean, you don't have a choice.
Well,
and
if you don't want to take the drugs, obviously there's something wrong with you.
Right. And that just proves, you're getting agitated because, we're trying to force you to take drugs. And so therefore you're crazy and you have to take the drugs. And you can't leave. And so ultimately, I involved an organization called the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. Now, if anyone wants to check these people out, their website is cchr.org. And God bless these people because they are fighting for our freedom. And at the end of the day, if you don't have the freedom to decide what you do with your own body, how you take care of yourself, and how you're going to live your life, then you don't have any freedom. And what we're talking about are fundamental human rights. And I like what George Carlin said. He talks about how we don't have any rights. All we have is a set of temporary privileges because rights aren't rights if you can just take them away.
That's right.
Just like that. And he basically cited how in 1942 we stuck literally what was it, like a huge
50,000, I think, Japanese Americans.
Oh my God. It's so sad. It's so sad. Who had done nothing wrong. Just stuck them in internment camps, and then we dropped the A-bomb on fucking Japan, and yeah, some nice things we've done for people of the world. We're real humanitarians in this country, because we care about people, right? For their own good, for their own protection. That's the attitude. But anyway, and of course they've been building FEMA camps all over the country for the last 30 years.
But they don't call them that.
Well, they're not called concentration camps anymore. They're called FEMA camps. And, we've been under martial law for a long time. And literally all the president has to do is declare a national emergency. And then literally the government is suspended. And FEMA takes over the government, running it out of Mount Weather. And there's this whole shadow government. And people say, oh, well, you're crazy if you believe in a shadow government. And, and like we were talking about before, well, where do you think these, 30, 60 trillion, whatever dollars are going to? And where is it going towards? And all you got to do is do a little bit of research into the secret space program and any black ops or shadow programs to figure out what's really
civilization.
Happening in this world. Exactly right. Exactly.
And there are people who are indeed doing research to say, where is this money going?
Well, that's right, and there have been a lot of people who have come out and ultimately paid the ultimate price in the form that they were killed. Look at, who Phil Schneider is.
Refresh my memory. That name sounds familiar.
He was an engineer who helped build all these DUMBs, which stands for Deep Underground Military Bases. And ultimately, when he realized what he was doing, he started speaking out against the government and the New World Order. And he was involved in a firefight in Dulce, New Mexico, because basically the reptilians and the Greys, which are different extraterrestrial groups, have really taken over the government. In 1954, under the Eisenhower administration, our government made a deal with the Greys, basically in exchange for military technology that the Greys would have the ability to abduct humans and cattle. And obviously, they had to, of course, the government informed about, who they were abducting and how many and all this stuff. And then ultimately they broke the agreement. Go figure, just the Native Americans, right? I guess that was our karma. Right? And the thing is that actually Pleiadians later met with the government and tried to convince them that the Greys were going to do just that. We're going to trick them. And basically the Pleiadians wanted to form an alliance with the U.S. government only on the basis that we literally disband all of our nuclear programs and nuclear weapons. And the government said, well, screw you. How can we trust you? And they decided to work with the Greys, and here we are, man. And so Phil Schneider, basically they sent in this 72 Navy SEALs or whatever, this whole team, including Phil, to basically try to retake the underground base in Dulce. And he was involved in a firefight with the Greys, and he actually had a huge scar down his chest from where he was shot with a laser beam. I mean, believe it or not. And ultimately, Phil was murdered for speaking out. You can watch his presentation on YouTube. It's called Phil Schneider, The Last Words, which I recommend everybody check out. But anyway, so going into back what we were talking about, what I ultimately did, like I said, was I involved this group called the Citizens Commission on Human Rights. And what they told me is that more and more and more that this stuff has been happening to a wide number of people lately, and their telephone is starting to ring off the hook, because basically if you know the truth and you're speaking out, you are at risk of being institutionalized. And the scariest thing about this is we know how crazy the legal system is. We know how crazy, quote, the criminal justice system is. And like Jordan likes to say, it's because the criminals are the ones administering the justice.
Yeah.
And the reason it's called the court system is because you play tennis on a court and you play tennis with a racket, because the whole thing is a racket. I mean, it really is. It's just a big scam. And this show is called Secrets of Saturn, and the judge wears a black robe because it represents the cult of Saturnalia. And this is all about the Saturnalian Brotherhood, and Saturn is the law, and it's what holds you back. Yes. And the judge rules from the bench, which stands in Latin, it stands for bank, because it's all about the money. And either way, they're going to get paid, right? So it's all about money, and that's what people got to remember. But the thing is, it's like Aaron Russo said, these people have all the money in the world. So at a certain point, it's not about money; it's about control. It's about feudalism, But it's just techno-feudalism, and they want to turn us all into serfs. And so, literally, if you are speaking out, whether you're protesting in person or you're using social media as a platform, we know the NSA spies on us, and we know, there are these huge data collection services, with the CIA and the FBI, and literally anybody, if you see something, say something, just like the Gestapo in Nazi Germany. And in Nazi Germany, you could be arrested for thinking un-German thoughts. And we are getting to that point in America where if you are, that's what the Patriot Act is all about. It's about being able to attack the patriots. And the patriots are the ones who love freedom in this country for what it really stands for. If you are for the Constitution, or if you are against the IRS or the government or any of the control systems, the police are going to fucking tase you and crack your skull in. And that's all there is to it. Or you're going to end up in a mental institution.
And we see plenty of evidence of the coming police state. Well, I say coming. The velvet glove of the police state right now.
And again, it's not called the government state. It's called the police state for a reason. And it's a combination of the police and the military. And, it can only be implemented by force. And, and that's the thing. They were saying that they were going to force me to take drugs against my will. And if I didn't take the drugs willingly, that I was going to be in there for a much, much longer time, and I was going to have a worse time. And ultimately that they could inject me with drugs against my will and hold me down and literally force me to take these drugs, quote, for my own protection and best interest, according to the state of Texas.
Because it sounds like you were thinking un-German thoughts.
I was, yeah. That's exactly right, Jason. And I just want to thank you again for this opportunity to present the story, because it's not about I'm just one person, and my life has significance. But what about you and your family and your children? Not or anybody, families and anybody's children or anybody. If you don't agree with what the government's doing, you're at risk. And basically, this is the time where we have to make a stand and decide if we want to be free and we want to have rights and what we really believe in and what we're willing to risk and lay on the line for that. Because the fact of the matter is that there are billions of us as human beings, and there are only several thousand people who are truly at the top of this pyramid. And the way that this whole thing is really controlled is by the people becoming the police over the other people. It's by people ratting on each other. It's by people turning on each other. It's like Benjamin Franklin said, hang together or hang separately.
That's right.
And, he was one to know because, he was the postmaster for the British, which basically meant he was the spy for the Queen. He read all the mail, like a fucking snitch. And that's where we're at. Snitch on their mother for $1, basically. And pretty much, ultimately what has happened is that I basically, I was recommended a lawyer by this group, the CCHR, and different volunteers came in and visited with me and, and documented everything that was going on. And they have been collecting all of the records. And ultimately, if we're able to, we may sue these hospitals because what they're doing is wrong. And I had the reason that I'm able to talk to you today, Jason, is because I, after being, at Menninger for a week and a half and then being at Methodist for about 6 days, I finally had my hearing today where basically I went before the judge and I was able to basically prove my sanity and that I was not a danger to myself or to others. And he released me on something called furlough, which I'm about I was going to say I'm about to sneeze.
Bless you.
Well, bless you too, my friend. And basically what furlough is that I was basically allowed to be released from the hospital, and now I'm staying in a hotel in Houston, Texas, but that I can't leave the state because literally, and actually the judge was fortunately for me, because at a certain point, your fate hangs in the hands of one person. One person could decide, whether you're going to basically live or die or be drugged out for life or be institutionalized for potentially a very long time. And you might die from being in a place like this because you are being tortured and forced to take drugs against your will. And, you got to go to group therapy and express how you feel and create coping skills and all this fucking bullshit while they're just drugging you out.
Why don't you describe some of the things you were telling me earlier before we began the interview? Some of the people you saw, what was happening to them?
Well, the thing is that basically they were just turning people into zombies. Now, that's not to say that these people didn't have some problems before they were going into these places. A lot of these people were drug addicts, or maybe they legitimately were bipolar or did have some schizophrenia or issues. But basically what they did was they got these people on so many different medications. One of my friends who I met in one of these places, he was a heroin addict, and they had him on 12 different medications most of the time. And this is a very smart, intelligent kid, and he a lot of days he literally he was practically drooling. He was slurring his words. He could barely stand up, because his balance was off because they had him on so many drugs. Another kid. He said he had been to 15 different rehab facilities for codeine, and he had HIV. And I think this kid was around maybe 21 or 22 or 23. And he literally, I was telling you earlier, this kind of amazed me. He literally, he broke one of his ribs while he was sleeping on a chair because his bones were so weak from probably all the soda and all the drugs he'd been taking. That he had osteoporosis, and he just broke his rib while he was sleeping. We're not talking about an 80-year-old man. We're talking about a 20-year-old.
That's why I wanted you to recount that again, because that was just the thought is horrifying to me that these things are allowed to go on.
Well, and they like I said, they forced, at this $30,000 facility, they were forcing everybody to drink tap water, and they would have smoke breaks every hour. All these addicts, okay, go on, smoke your fucking cigarettes. And
that's the other thing. $30,000. You would expect that these people are coming from families that are affluent. They have money,
right? But it's not about money. It's about control. And and they just sit you in front of the TV all day, and literally, people. I would hear people throwing up all the time. In the rooms next to me, and this girl threw up, and I was getting to the point where I was feeling sick just from just being in these places and just drinking the water and all. Being, you don't really get enough food to eat, and so you're kind of almost forced to just eat the snacks, which are all GMO and all this shit. It's totally insane, and and people are from their drug regimen, it's making them sick. And when I transferred over to Methodist. The people there were in far worse shape. There were people who literally, they looked like concentration camp victims. A lot of them didn't even know their own names. They were constantly, had tremors and were shaking. A lot of them needed diapers and were shitting themselves. Yesterday, a man was throwing up blood. These people were literally dying in front of my eyes. And I started to feel like I was dying just being in there and being trapped and, being forced to eat all this shitty food and just everything, drinking tap water and everything. It's so horrible. And literally, for my sake, fortunately, I was able to get away with taking almost no medication. The only two things that and again, I wasn't quite forced, but pretty much you're under total duress where if you don't go along with the program, they're basically going to say, well, you're not complying. And then they tell the doctors, and then they can force you to take drugs ultimately if they feel like you're getting agitated or you're out of line, And the only things that I took one pill called Protonix, which they had given me for my ulcer, which is like an acid blocker, and it totally fucked me up and hurt my stomach. And I was doing all right, just because while I was a manager, the only thing that I agreed to take were just vitamins. And I was taking sodium bicarbonate pills and fish oil and some B vitamins. And but when I was at Methodist, again, I had been involuntarily committed there, and they were really putting the pressure on me. And, they were saying they're basically, if I didn't just do it willingly, they were going to file the court to, petition me to take it involuntarily and potentially be there for a very long time. And so I took this one Protonix pill. It made me feel very sick. And then when I received my court orders, where basically they had, slandered me and said all this crazy stuff, and I was upset. Literally, one of the nurses basically forced me to take a Benadryl, and it totally upset my stomach, and I could feel it in my kidney and my liver. And I woke up the next morning and I was having tremors. And I mean, I know maybe people say that sounds ridiculous. It's just a Benadryl. But no, man, if you look up the side effects for Benadryl, it's very serious. All these things are very serious. And, they got people on a lot of these, taking 12 or 15 or however many different medications. And some of them are taking multiple times a day and at very high doses. And so for me, just taking a couple pills made me feel that sick. And imagine what it's doing. And I'm very sensitive to this stuff. But for most people, they don't even have a sense at all of what it's doing to them. But it is literally killing them. And it's really sick. And the only way that I was able to get out was because I hired a very good lawyer who has been dealing with who works with the Citizens Commission on Human Rights, which again they're actually a Scientology group, which don't let that faze you. It doesn't really matter, and they don't push that on anybody at all. And they're sanctioned under the United Nations, which is actually a really good thing in this case, even though the United Nations is a very it pretends to be this benevolent entity, but it's very evil because it's really the structure for the New World Order, one world government, But anyway, that's a whole different story. And basically, fortunately, like I said, I got out on furlough, but the Nazi doctors at this organization, they know I live in California. They know I don't really know anybody in Texas. And they're basically making me stay here for 5 days because they say, well, even though the judge let you out and doesn't think that you're a threat to yourself or anybody else, we think you are. And so we still want you to be in here and on medication. And so therefore, we're not going to outright discharge you, even though that's the judge's recommendation. And we're going to basically force you to go to this hearing and to see if we can get you committed.
Unbelievable.
And so ultimately, like I said, I was already in a bad financial situation, and that is why I even agreed to this nonsense in the first place, even though I thought I was going to rehab and not a psych facility, and I really got just tricked by my mother, and my uncle kind of helped in that, even though he was unwittingly he was duped as well, and I just got. And this was all for smoking some pot, right? and basically because of the stuff that I believed in or I knew to be true, and that I openly shared on Facebook and talked about to my friends and my family, and this is the price that I had to pay, and now I'm in I had a couple $1,000s when I walked in, and now I've had to literally pay thousands of dollars for my legal defense. My mother is not even going to give me money to get back to California. I have to stay in a hotel for 5 days and pay for all my food and all this stuff. And I'm basically, I'm running out of money. And in this world, if you don't have any money, you're fucked.
True enough. Have you spoken to your mother since you've been released?
I basically, well, the thing is, I gave her one last chance to make things right. Well, and this was before I was released, and I basically said, Mom, like, look, if you are still willing to pay me to go to rehab, I will go to a rehab clinic for 1 month if you'll ultimately give me money, or I'll engage in like weekly psychotherapy, and I'll take lithium. Of course, what I wasn't going to tell her was that I was going to take lithium. Orotate, which is a natural version of lithium. So if you actually have, bipolar, that's what I would recommend anybody take, or something called rubidium, which is a natural antidepressant. So, there are natural counterparts to all of these drugs in vitamins and supplements, and, you can do different holistic approaches like cannabis oil or any number of things, ayahuasca, or, just different vitamins and supplements, or, acupuncture or massage or whatever, But the point being is there are alternatives to this Nazi eugenics medicine. But my mother's not interested in any of that. All she really wants is me to be on drugs and me to be locked up and doped out. And she made that very clear, that we no longer had any kind of a deal. And I basically told her, well, all right, fine. Well, don't ever expect me to talk to you ever again then, And I basically, probably my last communication that I'll ever have with her is basically I wrote up this little article which I called Mad World, and basically trying to warn everybody, and I sent it out to all my email contacts, and I pretty much posted it everywhere that I could, to everybody on Facebook, and posted it on all my pages, where I basically tried to explain to people what's happening, and literally how the people who have tried to do anything or speak out against the system, like John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Aaron Russo, have all been murdered, and no one gives a fuck. And literally, how we will have a worse fate than the victims of Nazi Germany if we do nothing, which is pretty much what's happening. And literally how, I was writing this all from a mental institution. And then ultimately, now I have I've started a fundraiser for myself, which I'm calling Save Russell, because I've lived my life basically in the last couple of years. I've done everything that I can to help everybody else, and now I need some help, or else realistically I'm going to have a very hard time surviving.
Well, go ahead and give out any of your information that you want to give out.
Okay, well, basically, if anyone wants to reach me, there are several different ways, which probably are reasonable. You can contact me by my email. It's Lucifer, that's L with 4 O's, that's O's, not zeros, SEFER @gmail.com. My Skype address is HighOnLife, HIGHONLIFE SINZ88, or you can just search my name, Russell Blattberg, and I'll just spell that for you. That's RUSSELL. The last name is Blattberg. That's BLATTBERG. You can send me a friend request on Facebook, and I would recommend. A lot of the time I don't accept friend requests from people I don't know. So if you want to be my friend, maybe just send a message and introduce yourself or something, and I would be happy to accept your request. I also run, like I said, I run 6 different pages. One of them is called Mother Earth Medibles. Me and my girlfriend are planning, when we're able to start a vegan edibles company where basically we use organic products and infuse them with essential oils and make really high quality cannabis edibles, which actually are going to help people instead of being all sugary and making them sick. Because if you're a cancer patient, you want to be eating something that's good for you and tasty, right? And and selling Rick Simpson oil and stuff like that. Another page is called Pleiadian Perspective. Then I run the Jordan Maxwell page, and then I run another page called Gold for Broke. And ultimately, I'm planning to create a financial information website telling people about how the dollar is going to crash, and they're going to crash the stock market, and they're going to crash the bond market, and really. If you're going to invest your money in anything, you want to have it in hard assets, whether that's gold or silver, or, you're going to grow your own food or whatever it is. But it's real things are going to have value. I wouldn't suggest putting your money in buying a house or doubling down on your mortgage or betting on the fucking Dow Jones or, Bank of America, or keeping your money in a bank even is not a very good idea. And a lot of people think, Bitcoin, but, Bitcoin is just another CIA Ponzi scheme, which was really all about drug running and money laundering. And ultimately, they'll crash that too. Don't worry, So I
like the idea behind it. I have been suspicious about what may actually be behind it, though.
Right. Well, it's a nice idea, but you don't control it, and I don't control it, and so anyway, I created Gold for Broke, and we're ultimately, me and my partner will create a website. He's done a Twitter for it as well, and then there's my 2 biggest pages are Cure the World and then Plant the Seed, Invest in Tomorrow. So you can check out all those pages as well. And then, I have a cell phone, but I don't really check it that often. And so, probably those ways are the best ways to reach me. And ultimately, if you want to talk to me on the phone, Skype is really a good way to talk because it's free. And if you want to talk to me on the phone, just contact me, and I'll give you my cell phone number, and we can always talk that way. And like I said, I created this fundraiser for myself just because if I'm going to survive, and if people want me to continue to give them information, they're going to have to support me, in the same way that I've tried to support them. And it's basically it's on YouCaring. The actual URL is youcaring.com/other-save-russell/201659. You can find the link on my my Facebook pages, or any of my other my actual Facebook profile. Or you can just contact me and I'll send it to you. Or, look, man, if anybody wants to send me money, I can give you my bank account information. You can Western Union it to me. But if you want to support me, look, I'm planning to do as many radio shows and talk about this kind of stuff as much as possible because, if they can do this to me, you're next.
Well, that was the whole idea behind this. Let's get your story out there. You're a very knowledgeable individual to begin with, and we would have been having an interview anyway, but this seemed like the perfect first show because you're right. This happened to you, and it can happen to anyone.
Well, and I thank you, Jason, for having the balls and the courage to put this information out there because, it puts you at risk as well, and I want people to appreciate, what you're doing in this as well, because it's no easy task to come out and speak against the control system because it makes you a target.
So I've heard, and it is what it is. This is the first, hopefully, of many, and it's important that this information get out there because this is stuff that's really happening. This isn't crazy conspiracy theory. Of course, there's crazy conspiracy stuff mixed in with everything else out there, but I think the intelligent ones of us out there can kind of sift through and figure out what's real and what's not.
Well, absolutely. And the fact of the matter is that I think that people are afraid to speak out because they're afraid of losing their job, their paycheck, their security, whatever they have left, they're afraid of losing it. But guess what? If you do nothing, you're not going to have anything left. You're going to be put in a concentration camp and you are going to be worked to death because ultimately we as Americans are all responsible for the national debt, and they're going to kill you. And, or you are just going to become, a techno slave and be part of the transhuman agenda where you're going to be RFID'd and that's it. And if they don't like what you're doing, they'll just turn you off your chip, and then you can't have money and you have no identity. And look, as it is, without a driver's license or a state ID, you're basically a non-human. At this point, you can literally be arrested for being homeless.
Yeah, and states are enacting laws to deal with the homeless in one way or the other.
It's very sad, and they set up the homeless spikes and stuff where you got to pay to sleep or sit on a park bench.
Yes, I saw that.
It's totally insane. So yeah, we're just crazy conspiracy nut jobs, and that's why you need to be institutionalized and drugged out for your own good and protection, of course.
Un-German thoughts, my friend.
Un-German thoughts. Well, I think that's a good note to end the interview on.
I think so.
I just want to wish everyone out there the best, and fight the good fight.
Well, this was a fantastic first show. I think we should have you on again as soon as possible to get an update and see where you end up, and hopefully you folks out there will be able to help Russ out.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. I really appreciate it, man. I love you, dude.
Love you too, man. Thank you. It's been great. Good night, everyone. First show, Secrets of Saturn. We'll see you soon.